Dr. Bert Twaalhoven. I prepared a nice little introduction, but he told me earlier the really important facts are 52 companies, 8 children, 22 grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bert Twaalhoven.
And none of my children wanted to work for me. It's kind of a family of entrepreneurs. My story is on a research project initiated by Thea Pritrin, the former minister of Slovenia, who has listened to my speeches about my failures, because I only had 17 failures, which cost me $54 million. And slowly on, it came into a book called Learn, Earn, and Return. So my presentation is about how I came to study ultimately at Harvard, how I started. I don't show how much money I made, but I made some. And then really a call to entrepreneurs who have done well to give back to their university or to society. And you can get that book as ebook via Amazon. So I had 30 niches in 4 branches, 54 companies, 40 startups in 13 countries, including 16 or 17 failures, and 42 crises in 42 years, always a crisis. But my net return on equity after tax has been 60% compound over the last 40 years. So figure that one out for those of you who are scientists. I was a small kid, and during the Second World War, the Allies made a mistake because they thought the German missiles came from our home in The Hague, and they bombed us out, and my dad, the medical doctor, lost everything. And I got a scholarship for a 1-year study at the Jesuits, Fordham in New York, and with $20. So when I arrived, I became dishwasher the same evening for 50 cents. And during college, I had 26 jobs. I went to Fordham University and, of course, played soccer. And we had Indians there, we had Japanese, we had everybody there. Germans, Dutch. But because the Jesuit, then a famous sociologist, was a great inspiration for me, Joe Fitzpatrick, who said, it's not just the Catholic religion, but all religions which are important for mankind. And then this guy was a soccer player, and he became a Jesuit, and that guy then became president of Georgetown University. He went to Oxford, and he went to Rome, and you don't know who this guy is, Bill Clinton. And Tim Healy sent Bill to Oxford. And of course, I didn't know Bill Clinton, but he was the great inspirer. Here I was hitchhiking to California to pick fruit with the Mexican wetbacks. Wetbacks means that the Mexicans walked over the Rio Grande illegally, and there's still 10 million every year. California fruit companies could not exist without them. And then I met my wife, Swiss, at the nun school. She didn't want to become nun, so she married me. And but because the Jesuits don't know much about business, at least I thought so, I got a scholarship at Harvard Business School. And these were the professors who really inspired me. George Doriot set up the first venture capital company in the world, ARD. He was the founder of INSEAD in Paris. He died, of course. Charlie Williams was the most fantastic finance professor at Harvard. And you've all heard about Michael Porter, but this was his guru. Michael is a good marketing guy, but this guy, who unfortunately died, became president of Continental Oil, Jack McLean, was very, very inspiring. I learned a lot from him. So, oh wait, I thought I had, oh, it's not there. I went to Canada, worked for the aluminum company of Canada, and had to do consolidation, all kind of stupid things. But in the meantime, I really wanted to become an entrepreneur. And I had an idea that no one in Europe was making extrusions for the building trade. So I thought of a scheme to set that company up. But I went back to George Doriot He said, Bert, you know nothing about business. Why don't you go 4 months to Wall Street? And that's where I learned business plans and how to find a partner. So I found a partner, and I lost my wife's inheritance because this stuff, what is called a tool, extrusion tool, we imported from Detroit because nobody could make it. And instead of having a month delivery, it took us 1.5 years, and I just lost the contract, and then my partner kicked me out. So I went into the laundry business, and that became my first success. No one had an automatic washing machine where you can wash in 35 minutes. So I brought one because we already had 3 kids, and imported 12 of them, hired Ellie Coate, Miss Holland. She's now 71, she's still as beautiful. I said to Ellie, who is that? Oh, that's my mother, she also worked for you. So after 2 months, when the store finally became busy, I had an article in the newspaper, and the newspaper said, this great invention from America. Of course, my mother said, I was standing outside, you went to Harvard, what the hell are you doing in the laundry business? So we had an article on Wednesday, I placed an ad on Saturday, if you want to own your own business, come to Bert. And I sold 350 stores all across Europe. In Holland, in Germany, in Belgium, Switzerland. And then I got into the car wash in 1962, before anybody here was born. And the trouble was with the French and the Spanish lacquer of the cars came right off. So this was another one of my failures. Then an Australian came to me and said, Bert, you used to import the tools from my company in Detroit. Why don't we do it in Holland? And that became a tremendous success. And almost a monopoly, we made a lot of money, and we set up tool companies all over the place. We set them up in Italy, Bergamo, in Paris, in Birmingham. We built a little heat treatment company, and all kinds of related. But the characteristic of a tool company is that it on average is a small company where the owner is the tool maker himself. So it does not lend itself to a kind of overall corporate activity. These two, I bought Cutcom from Colorado, and then my son Bob, who went to MIT, he said, Dad, I can do it for 10% of the price. So he did that, and then Bob said goodbye, and he started the company, and today he has 100 employees, and he has 35,000 clients in the Cutcom. And his brother, John, said, I will do it in Europe. So John now has a very successful company also in Europe, in the same field. However, 3 years after starting Almax, in the middle of the night, my whole factory burned down. Totally. And there was nothing left because it was a wooden building. And the cause of the fire was spark erosion. Any engineers in this room? I'm not an engineer, I know nothing about this. So I hired a Dutch student. I've hired 650 students in my life. I hired a Dutch student to find out what other applications. Cooling holes for jet engine blades. And I started this business and became the largest in Europe. And built from that a whole string of other companies. And we identified everything, conical tooling, making other tooling, and drilling holes in blades and jet engine. And then I found out that the biggest application was in parts and spare parts for jet engine. This engine lasts technically 20 years, but as a product, 60 years. And it has 25,000 parts in it. This thing, which my son in Shanghai makes parts for, has 25,000 patents. This product will last 60 years. How long will this last? Anyone knows? What business do you want to be in? My dad was a medical doctor. He didn't make money producing babies. He made money repairing babies. So what is very important, that you understand an industry, its characteristics and its life cycle. And they used to teach at Harvard. I don't know whether they teach at Cambridge, but to understand the industry is key. So every year I hired students to be basically a player in the supply cycle, which, like the automobile industry, is a whole cascade of suppliers, very highly specialized, from heat treating to machining to honeycomb. That is a nice story. We make honeycomb for General Electric. And then at the show in Chicago, my son Felix, who is now an independent entrepreneur, Procter & Gamble came by and said, we need this for Pampers. So he built a company which made the largest tools to produce Pampers, both in Holland and in Germany and in America. Highly specialized. So out of that, over the years, this is kind of an organization chart, middle 80s, we had all kinds of activities run and owned by Bert, me, and some venture capitalists, but I had 60%. And then, these were the industries I was in. And that, of course, was escape in the early 60s. It was tooling, and then from tooling and the fire came the turbine parts. Now, each one of them I can talk for hours, but repairing the large cases of jet engines or for stationary turbines or seals for engines, total different business in a different company with very specialized technologies. I know nothing about engines, but if you know what you don't know, you're a winner. And I exploited that with my managers, 9 nationalities, of which 34 became entrepreneur. 7 nationalities board members, including a fellow from Rolls-Royce. Joint ventures with Rolls-Royce. Financial partners with Singapore government, with 3i, and university project. Of course, remember, this is over the years. And these were my managers. And you know, because of time, I can go into great detail, but this guy I found at the University of St. Gallen. Tom Lieberman, Wharton Business School, came to me, became business development manager. Fred Becker was CEO of Airwork Overhaul. So all these, by being, for example, I should have been at the Paris Air Show today, because there are talent there who are so frustrated that they never become president of Rolls-Royce or British Aerospace. And when this talent has quality, I will look at him, consider him. And these were my managers who became entrepreneurs. And the latest one is Burkhard Schneider, wherever he is. And Burkhard Schneider, I fired in 1996, and he said, can I take that little trading company from you? I said, Burkhard, we make 100,000 Deutschmark, you can buy it, 10 times earnings. I said, I will finance you, because he had no money. We made it 50-50. He paid me back in 3 years, and then he had an option on the other 50. So he paid basically nothing, well, $1 million. He sold it 4 months ago for 200 million cash. Unfortunately, I did not keep my 50%. And Jan Alberts left me after 12 years, and you can find him on the Dutch stock market. Somebody said he's billionaire, whatever it might be. I'm not billionaire, but I'm rich. Yeah, here's Jan Alberts. He worked for me for 12 years. And when he left, he said, well, that's the end of Bert. She was a secretary earning $25 a week. I sent her to Harvard for 3 months, and Ellen took over 5 companies, made it a big success. And this is our prince, he's dead, Bernard, visiting the factory. And that's Burkhard, who made so much money. And this is my son, Mark. He set up out of Stanford an inspection robot, became very successful. Then at the end of communism, his company collapsed. He took all the assets to China. We did a joint venture with, it sounds almost simple, all simple, but he made a joint venture with the Chinese military government, became very successful. And then the results became bad. He was earning 150 a year, Chinese engineers 1,500 a year. So I fired Mark. But he went to Harvard for 3 months, and then he became CEO of Amphenol, he became CEO of Teleplan. They fired him with a couple of millions. And now he has a factory in Shanghai, a house in Phuket, and a house in Holland, and an apartment in Hong Kong. He's coming tomorrow night. And he knows it all. I have kids who know everything. But I wish to have kids who say, I don't know, and then... Now, in terms of business plans, and I have looked zillions of them, when you see these business plans, I have never seen, ladies and gentlemen, a first business plan work. I'm awfully sorry. I'm awfully sorry. So when you come with your business plan, I want to know your first year by month, your second year by month, third year by quarter, etc. And then I want the business plan. What can go wrong with you or your partner or the customer who promised you? What can go wrong? So I want to see a negative business plan. And then I want to know is who are your advisors? Who is your sounding board? My experience, I'm sorry, 30 months of losses, then another 30 months to recoup, and then you become rich. So you better have a very long-term program. Now, my board members, as you can see, come from very sophisticated companies. So sophisticated, when I want to fire one of them, I don't tell you which one, I needed 2 years to get rid of him. But, you know, he was John McDonald, my great friend, head of McKinsey, Leo de Blok, former Minister of Economics, Rob Aberson, Vice President of KLM, George Rangasamy, Technical Director of Singapore Airlines. But not all at once. Remember, this is my experience over 40 years. And this was my network, my joint venture network. This one was where they kicked me out. Wood were picked. I should have stayed with him because John Wood on the London Stock Exchange, tremendous successful company. This is a German company, very high tech in the area of ceramic coatings on jet engine blade. This is the Singapore government, becoming a joint venture. And when I didn't make money in 2 years, they said, Bert, you can take over our shares for 50%, which we did. And then later on, it became a fantastic success. For any of you going to Singapore, find out about Interturbine Singapore, now owned by Pratt & Whitney. And this was my financial network. As you can see, Amro Bank. I talked about George Dorio from Harvard. He became an investor in our company. And then he did that via EED. And then the banks would not, his shareholders would not finance second, third, or fourth round. Don't ever invite family or friends unless they can come in for a second or third time. Because your first plan, I'm sorry, may not work. And I have a lot of experience of failures in this regard. And I worked a lot with universities. And we found out via my board, via my managers, that Boris Paton in Kiev was the guru in the area of ceramic, but also Penn State. So the annual conference at Penn State, that's where I, of course, went to. Not that I understood the technology, but I found a guy from Siemens, Wolfgang Behle, who I hired. He was really a guru. An electrical discharge machining in the University of Leuven and also MIT, where I was last week. And then on competition analysis, I worked with Harvard. And during my life, I hired 650 students. Mostly several Indians. I see Indians here. When they were at Harvard or MIT, I interviewed them and I hired them. And so I went personally to interview these students and discover talent, to do competition analysis and industry analysis. My saga over 40 years, well, you can buy my book, Learn, Earn and Return. We have been all over, as you can see. Unfortunately, I sold all the companies because of my 8 children, 7 entrepreneurs, and they've worked for me, but one of my kids doesn't want to work for the other kid, and another kid is not qualified enough, and I don't want to get in that discussion, but most of them are doing fine. Oh, here are my failures. Do we have another 2 hours? A matter of fact, you know, this was technology. This was my stupid. I never should have entered the aluminum extrusion business because it is a semi-fab and you don't control the raw materials and you don't control the end products. So you get squeezed, even if I had majority. And this was a failure because the manager quit. This was technology we picked up from England, but it did not live up to the quality of the German automobile industry. All kinds of reasons. As a matter of fact, on Monday I gave a speech in Moscow for a couple of hundred people, and they said, Bert, I thought you learned something from your failures, but look at the last failures, they're even worse. Maybe I learned nothing, but you know, every one of them I could give a very detailed explanation why it failed. Patton, Ukraine, is my biggest failure. The Russian MiGs were able to go straight up because they have ceramics on the turbine blades. Incredible temperature. The machine was developed by Boris Patton, he's still alive, in Kiev, Ukraine. The Russians accepted 90% scrap out of the machine, and the other 10% lasted 1,000 hours. I don't think you want to fly an aircraft where the engine only lasts 1,000 hours. So I transferred technology to Germany. They built a better machine. And if they ever are able to prove that the ceramic will hold on your car engine, you may be driving a bomb, but that of course will have much, much better fuel efficiency. And I think they're still working on that kind of technology. What do you do for relaxation? You know, I've had 42 crises in 42 years. Here I'm with my kids in the Colorado River. Here I'm with my CFO in Las Vegas. Here I'm at the World Economic Forum skiing, and I still love to sail. So when I want to get away from my wife or from whatever, I go sailing. Don't repeat that. Now, this is really a story for entrepreneurs who have arrived and who have financially done well, is you have to give back. That's the end of my show. Thank you very much. Any questions? Any questions? Who is, yes?
Bert, how do you choose good people?
Recommendation. You know, these kids who get into the MIT Sloan management, and if they're an engineer who have worked for Rolls-Royce, I got to see them. And I may take them for a month or two during the summer. I've done that with lots of students. Yeah. And I've used headhunters. Yeah, I've used a headhunter in, where is he, in Munich, Roland Berger. I was his first client. And Egon Zender, he was my first client. And very specifically. But I went to Moscow when communism collapsed, and Moscow Aviation Institute has very bright people. I personally interviewed 50 of them and hired 2 of them after they had visited us. And Avalyani from Georgia came to me. He was accepted at Harvard Business School, requirement first to work. So we hired him in Holland and in Dallas. He went to Harvard, and then I wanted to hire him, but Alcoa made him a big. Good people. But whenever I go to Davos, World Economic Forum, I used to give a speech. I asked my secretary, who is from the engine industry? Who is from Harvard? Who is from Holland? And, you know, to see the president of Rolls-Royce as a small guy, no way. But by telling John Rose that I'm in Davos and love to see him half an hour, they open the door. But if you go here, you know, you're in the bureaucracy. And I used the Harvard Mafia. I mean, I was head of the Harvard Mafia, so whenever I travel in the world, I ask my secretary, who is in Los Angeles from Harvard. Now, in San Francisco, together with Arthur Rock, we gave a prize to Stephen Jobs before Stephen Jobs collapsed. Well, that opens windows. That's a half answer. Huh? Yeah. Question? Yes?
So, is this the story of serial entrepreneurship, or has there been parallel entrepreneurship as well?
No, no, good question, because who's from India here? I gave a speech at the University of Bombay, and the president, a lady, Bert, can you talk to 100 students? I said, about what? Anything. Well, I said, how many are family business? I don't know. I came to the class, how many are for family business? And then I said, who wants to work for mom and dad? No hands went up. So I told her, you got a big issue to tackle. No, so I thought that, you know, with my kids being all international educated, 3 engineers, 5 MBAs, that we would have continuation. Some don't want to work for their brother or sister. Some are too stubborn. But to me, it became slowly clear that they wanted to be on their own. And 7 of the 8 are entrepreneurs. My daughter was in Moscow. My son is in Shanghai. My other son is in California. My other son. And we have tremendous band. Last week, my granddaughter got married, and we were all together. But it was a process. It was not, I really expected to have a family business in the early 80s. But slowly on, and they were all internationally educated, they saw opportunities for themselves. Was that the best solution? I have no idea. I would have loved to stay in power turbines repair, because the difference is a power turbine station, whether it is in India, Vietnam, or in Russia, usually doesn't have a huge maintenance crew. And there we have great opportunities to repair. And my manager is from Iran, who my son met in Oxford, and he's now an independent entrepreneur, very successful in Holland. Next question.
Great, actually, we run out of time.
So, the last question.
Last one.
What's your experience or guidance on the right time to take external funding? Just in terms of how much you should try and do, keeping the equity yourself?
90% of all businesses are financed by family in the whole world. 90%. China now, there's 30 million companies, all family. Italy is all family companies. The trouble is, you got some money from your father or your uncle, and he thought that was it. And then there's a second round. Today you have crowdfunding, nobody knows whether that's going to work, because it's the intermediary who really pushes that. And you have angel investors, which is more important now in Europe than venture capital. And there, yeah, when do you do that? When you still have losses? You have to have a solid story. Ideally, a customer. I know I had customers basically in all my startup. But if I talk to you, I want to talk about your competitors. And I want to even visit them. My competitors were very irritated. Oh, you must be working for Bert. Some Harvard kid came in their factory to find out how many employees he had and what his sales were. So you have to do a lot of homework to understand the industry and to understand your competitors. And if you then can convince a financier to put money in it, the advantage of angel investors is they are former entrepreneurs in many cases. The disadvantage is they will walk into your factory when you're not around. That you have to accept.
Great. So, really, thanks again, Bert, for this incredible story. With a round of applause. Thank you very much, Bert.
A copy of this story, even more extended one, I have. So go ahead. Talk to Cambridge.
Great. Thank you very much.